everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone to this very special event, and I'd also like to extend my thanks to the law faculty for helping to make this program happen, and especially to Sunny Jacobs and Peter Pringle for agreeing to come here and visit us here at Griffith College. We at the Irish Innocence Project at Griffith College are so grateful for them agreeing to spend some time with us and share the story of their lives. I first heard of Sunny and Peter back in November of 2011 when I read a story about their wedding in the New York Times. Now, every love story is special, right? But their love story is extraordinary. It's not everyone that has Brooke Shields, Marlo Thomas, and Amy Irving as witnesses, but that's not really what made their marriage stand out. It's the story of their lives and the circumstances under which they met. They are from two different countries, on two different continents, but the paths of their lives have been eerily similar. Sunny is an American who was wrongfully convicted of killing two cops in Florida and sentenced to death row in 1976, serving 17 years before she was freed. Peter is an Irishman who was wrongfully convicted of killing two cops and was sentenced to death row in 1980 and served 15 years before he was freed. They met at an Amnesty International program on the death penalty in Galway. They married 4.5 years ago, and they have opened up their home in Galway as the world's first sanctuary for exonerees. They are two of the most exemplary souls I know, and I'm privileged to consider them friends. Welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anne.
Now, yesterday we had a meeting of the Irish Innocence Project at Griffith College, and I invited everybody to submit questions for Sunny and Peter. And I have those. I'm going to share them. But before I do, I get to ask the first question because I'm the boss here.
All right.
So, as the project manager of the Irish Innocence Project at Griffith College, which is one of 2 out of 68 similar organizations worldwide that are recognized by the Innocence Network, that has both law and journalism students working cooperatively on cases. And I'm particularly interested in promoting the respective roles of law and journalism because I'm a journalist, not a lawyer. Thank you, Jackie.
Jackie.
There we go. Good, Margot.
So I'm really interested in the respective roles of law and journalism in how they might hold the criminal justice system accountable. So I know, Sunny, for you, in your case was taken up not only by lawyers, pro bono lawyers, but a childhood friend, right, who happened to be a documentary filmmaker. So I'm interested in what you both have to say about what the role should be or could be of both law and journalism and how that might play out.
Okay. Well, for me, I think journalism and documentary filmmaking is, in my mind, comes under the larger umbrella of media. And I think media plays an extremely important role because it's the interface between the legal system and the public. People don't know what's going on in the courts except for what they read or see from the media.
Mm-hmm.
So it's extremely important. They find that in cases where the public actually participates in a trial, that the trial is more likely to be more balanced. When the judge and the jury see that people are interested in this person, and that can only happen through the media. Otherwise, people don't know about it. And then there's social media as well, which is kind of a different thing, but in this under the same umbrella. So I think that it's a marriage like of necessity,
Mm-hmm.
really, between the two. Peter?
Yes, but as you're speaking, I was just thinking that sometimes the media do a kind of witch hunt on the accused, and that can have a detrimental effect on the outcome of a trial. So that the person is not seen as a human being at all, but rather as some sort of monster who's committed some sort of terrible crime.
Mm-hmm.
And in that instance, I think judge and jury can swing the wrong way.
Right.
So the balanced media is really what's important, and the investigative journalist is what's important, and that takes huge courage to be that, because it goes against, you see, when there's a particularly high-profile crime is committed, and an investigative team of police officers are assigned to investigate the crime, they're put under huge pressure to get results. And they're put under pressure from their superiors and from the political establishment and also from the media. Now, they're not put under pressure to get justice.
Right.
They're put under pressure to get results. And that's what they have to do. And sometimes human nature being the way it is, and it is about human nature always, because every system that we have that's been either designed by or is run by human beings is going to have all the failings of other human beings and that of human nature. And so if you get a situation where a particular police officer or more maybe genuinely think that the person that they're considering is actually guilty, but they don't have proof, then there's a temptation there to, to juggle the evidence a little bit, maybe hide this particular document or twist that little statement a little bit to get a conviction, because they believe that's the right thing. And then, even though it's the wrong thing, once they get the conviction, they're praised for it and they get promotion, which of course convinces them that this is the way to go, and they keep doing that. And that's just the reality of human nature. An investigative journalist has the capacity to lay out a case in the correct way, and this has the possibility of influencing courts and juries and public into the objective way of looking at a case rather than the subjective way. And it has the possibility of influencing towards justice rather than injustice. It's an interesting thing in my own case that the police officers who lied in court were all promoted. And the police officers who refused to lie in court never received a promotion, because they didn't get the results, you see.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on something that, there's a tendency to want to, it's human nature to want to achieve, to further your career. And so it all becomes part of that big ball of wax about, well, we'll just shave this and we'll, twist this, and for that result,
Yeah.
and oh, by the way, I'll benefit too, because I'll make that next career move.
That's right. Yeah.
And sometimes that's not even illegal, like in the case of making a murderer. The interrogation techniques that they used are that they teach them in school.
That's right.
That's considered okay.
Yeah.
When we could all see that it wasn't okay at all,
That's
but
right.
but that's been the accepted practice, and Peter always makes this point that the accepted practice sometimes isn't right.
That's right. Yeah.
So we have to re-examine the way things are done, because more and more and more cases of wrongful convictions are coming out, and that's not only due to Innocence Project's lawyers, it's also due to investigative journalists.
Right.
And so we're starting to see that we need to reevaluate the entire system, and not just in America, but everywhere here.
And speaking this afternoon, we were speaking with some secondary school kids, and one of them made a point about corruption, you see. And I believe myself that, of course, the system is corrupt. It's the nature of human being systems. But it's not necessarily corrupt in the sense of fraud or of crime being committed, but rather the ethics that should underline the criminal justice system become corrupted by malpractice. And once the malpractice is accepted, it becomes the norm. And then what actually seems to happen is, and I know this for a fact, that over time, law students are then instructed and taught the malpractice as the correct practice. And so the reality then is distorted right down along the line. So it's very important about ethics. And this is again where an investigative journalist can lay out the ethical situation relating to any given case and put it before the public so the public can see it in a different way than they do if they're reading the gutter press.
But getting back to what you were saying about, being ambitious and career-driven and using cases to sort of further your career and being willing to shave ethics. As much as, I think investigative journalists can have a positive role, you touched on the fact that, sensational coverage can also corrupt the process. And so I think it's important to keep that in mind, that there are cases, for example, when we were talking to the students earlier today, we talked about the case of the West Memphis 3. It's a case in West Memphis, Arkansas. Damien Eccles and 2 other co-defendants, they were all arrested for the murder of 3 8-year-old boys whose naked bodies were found bound and in a water ditch. And initially, because of some of the wounds that were on the bodies, it was seen that this was an example of a satanic killing. And so the press went crazy, sensationalizing that crime. And this was a small, southern, conservative, rural town. And people were absolutely inflamed and demanding justice, and they wanted the culprits caught. And the press just ran away with this idea that this was a satanic killing. And to a great extent, it led to their false conviction. And then what happened, and I think that this is so interesting because it illustrates so clearly what role, both positive and negative, the press can have in these cases. An HBO documentary film team came down, and they came down thinking they were going to do a film about satanic killings. And when they came and they did this, they started doing the legwork and started doing the research, it turns out that no, they realized that this wasn't a satanic killing at all. These guys were actually railroaded. And so the first documentary was followed up by another and another, and then people started hearing about the case. Johnny Depp got involved, Eddie Vedder from Pearl Jam got involved, and the next thing you know, the pendulum starts swinging in the other direction, and there's great sympathy for these 3 guys. And eventually enough pressure is put on the authorities that they're released. But I think, you're right, that it's human nature, and so there are some journalists that are very ambitious, and it's all about like selling stories, and so I think it's just a really important thing to keep in mind, both positive and negative.
Right. Like I said earlier in my own case, the press gets their stories from the prosecution, not from the defense. The
Right.
defense is usually very quiet about their case.
Right.
But the prosecutor is the one they get their stories from.
That's right.
So naturally, they want the prosecutor to call them first.
That's right.
So they want to please the prosecutor with the stories that they write. And that immediately causes things to be
Unbalanced,
skewed.
yeah.
Unbalanced.
Yeah,
So
It should
exactly.
be said that in this jurisdiction, there's a principle of constitutional law called real risk of an unfair trial.
Real
based on-
risk?
Of an unfair trial based on pre-trial publicity.
That's right.
And so therefore, if the sensationalist press gets out of hand, you can make that application to prevent a trial going ahead. Of course, it's only happened in one case, Mr. Charles J. Hawking.
Oh, I see.
Whereas the application has been made by many others.
Yeah.
That's the only one that's succeeded.
But I think it's a very good rule, and they should adopt it in America as well.
So one of the questions that the Irish Innocence Project at Griffith College caseworkers submitted was, do you have any faith in the criminal justice system today?
I think there's a movement now. I think consciousness has been raised sufficiently, like 100 monkeys, are aware. So now things are starting to I think there is a change happening. The best example I know of is in Norway, where they have a commission to study wrongful convictions. And it's not run by the state, it's a separate institution, but actually, if your case is referred back to the courts by them, you almost have 100% surety that your case will be overturned. In America, they have the Innocence Projects now. Almost every state has one. Most universities are looking into having one, and that's helping tremendously. And now that movement is spreading worldwide. So I do think there's a movement. I do think there's reason to be hopeful. How about you, Peter?
Well, I have reservations about it, I have to admit. I was released in 1995, and I opened a case against the state over what they did to me in October of 1995, and I'm still awaiting a hearing in 2016. So that's 21 years. I think it was 2002, I was notified that I was going to get my hearing. I went up to the High Court, Sonny was with me, and we went into the courtroom in the rotunda there, and everything was assembled. And the president of the High Court came out, and the case was called. And he said, "I'm very sorry, we don't have a judge available today to hear the case." And me, in my naivety, thought, that's fine, sure, we'll be back tomorrow. When I went out into the rotunda, I said that to my lawyers, and they said, "No, I'm sorry, Peter, it doesn't work like that. Now you're off you were on the top of the list, and now you're off the top of the list, so you go back to the bottom of the list, and you have to work your way back up again." So it's kind of like a legal game of snakes and ladders. If they don't want to hear the case, they don't have a judge available, and so they dump it back to the bottom, and you have to wait again. So I'm still waiting again. And that's the reality of the justice system in Ireland. But at the same time, let me tell you this, I took sort of a certain amount of solace out of the fact that you will remember the Larry Goodman situation, the meat factories and all that sort of stuff. Well, Larry Goodman had a case in the High Court. It took 13 years for him to get a hearing. So it's not specifically me, but rather the system is so inadequate in how it performs that it's slow and ponderous, and you just have to take your time. You have to wait your turn. You have to have eternal patience. I think myself, they're just waiting for me to die, so they don't have to take it, you know. Because they don't want the truth to come out. And the truth of the case that I was wrongly convicted about hasn't come out yet, and they don't want it out.
But again, I think that depends on the public. If the public demands that they want things to be done right, they want the truth, they don't just want people put away, then the tendency is to change, to
and
go
this
with
is
that.
where the investigative journalist comes in. It's education.
It's the interface,
You
again,
see,
back and forth.
that's right, it is the interface. And good journalism can actually, in a sense, educate the public about what's actually going on, and ask questions. And can ask questions. You see, what happens in Ireland is once a person is accused, once a person is charged with an offence, the press can't speculate about the case, and they can only report on it, and that's because of this unfair trial idea, you know, that David's been talking about, which is quite correct. In America, it's quite different. But I knew after I was arrested that there had been a cover-up. An investigative journalist contacted me in the prison to tell me that there had been a cover-up, and that's why I was arrested, because they needed to get closure to stop investigation.
It's incredible.
Yeah.
So you guys just came back from the Innocence Network conference. It was in San Antonio, Texas this year.
Yes, ma'am.
It's the annual gathering of all the innocence organizations that are part of the Innocence Network. What do you think, what would you point to as, and this is one of the questions, what needs to change in the criminal justice system?
Okay. Prosecutors need to be made accountable for their actions,
Big number one.
without a shadow of doubt. They need the system needs to be more transparent. It needs to be, actually coming back to journalism, it needs to be reported in layman language that people understand rather than legalese. Prosecutors and police need to be held accountable for what they do. And until that happens, you're not really going to get change. Now, interestingly enough, in Texas, recently a prosecutor was dismissed because of malpractice, and actually he was charged and he was sentenced to 5 days in prison, which
It's the
was
first time
suspended.
it's ever happened.
But
That's right.
yeah,
Suspended
the significance
sentence.
of it was that he was convicted and sentenced to prison. Now, he was sentenced to 5 days, and he was released immediately on a suspended sentence. And you know, but it's the fact that he was sentenced is what's important.
Yeah.
Yes.
This,
It's the first time a prosecutor has
First time.
faced
Things work in
criminal
us.
charges.
in human nature and in our society, like there are cycles that happen, you know, and the cycle is swinging more in favour of justice than it did before. Sometimes when we're doing presentations, somebody will ask, but what about justice? And Sunny often answers and she says, there is no justice, there's just us. Now, she doesn't mean just us. She means just all of us. And if all of us are prepared to seek justice, then we would get justice. But if we're prepared to allow the administration of justice to be handled by officials without any checks and balances, without any accountability, without any equality, without any transparency, we're going to continue to get injustice.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, no matter how good the system is, there will inevitably be injustice at some stage because we're human. But we can lessen that to a great degree if people look out for justice and learn to love justice. Because one thing I'll tell you now, the so-called evidence used to convict me and the so-called evidence used to convict Sonny Jacobs related to neither of us. That same evidence could be applied to any two of you people here, and you would have been also convicted. It was all made up.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't factual. It was due to malpractice. It was due to prosecutorial misconduct, and could be applied to anybody. And that's true, to our knowledge, of all of the people we know who are exonerees. And we met 155 exonerees when we were in San Antonio in Texas. And the 155 exonerees between us collectively served over 2,000 years in prison. If you can even imagine that, it's so gross.
2,351 years,
Exactly.
to be precise. But getting back to the basic question, aside from prosecutorial misconduct, there's false confessions that are like we saw on the documentary, that they get a young person who's scared to death, and they convince them if they will say that they did it, things will go easier for them. So they do, because they figure, I didn't do it, so that, you know, it won't hurt to say I did now just to get this to stop. And then, you know,
Right.
they'll find out I didn't really do it. So they confess, and then that confession is it. They don't need any evidence anymore. A number of the men said that happened to them. Also, there's, aside from false confessions and prosecutorial misconduct, there's also the hiding of evidence that might have shown that the person didn't do it. That's a big problem. And then there's the jailhouse snitch that they call it, someone who is up on some charges themselves and sees a way to perhaps gain some leniency. And sometimes it's their idea, and sometimes they're approached by the prosecution, which is what happened in my case as well. And so then you have somebody coming forward and saying, they told me, she said she did it, she enjoyed it, she'd do it again. That's what they said in my case. You know, and so that's another problem. We found that there are pretty much 4 basic things that you'll find in every one of the wrongful conviction cases. And those are the basic ones.
So, given these,
And there's junk science that's coming
yeah.
out a lot.
Oh yeah,
too.
junk science. Yeah.
Cognitive and confirmatory bias, I think, is cognitive and confirmatory bias, I think, is very important.
Yeah.
I think we need to explain what that is, because I think that's the thing that troubles troubles me most.
You mean like when they submit evidence to a crime lab and they send the whole description along with it?
They
And
say
they
the person's done it, and therefore the forensics or the
That's
non-forensics
right.
say
trying
yes.
to please,
And
yes.
if you, to please them,
Well-
if you take it independently to other people, they say, no, there's no match whatsoever. It's
Yes,
extraordinary.
yes.
Even if,
Human nature again.
even if they send something to a forensic science lab and say, this is a sample of the blood of the accused person, detained, accused,
Who's supposed
suspected
to have
of
done this
murder,
horrendous thing.
and this is another sample. Can you see what you can match here? They're just going to try and please the police. They're going to try and get a
Yeah.
match because the idea that the
They're
person has
helping.
been arrested
Yeah.
and is suspected is nearly enough to convince them that well, maybe the person's guilty.
They want to help.
Whereas if they send
Sure.
2 samples and say, here are 2 samples, see what you can find. Without saying
Yeah.
what it's for or who it's for
And
or
what do you
anything
call
else.
that, David?
Then you're going to get
Cognitive?
an
The
objective.
first is called a cognitive bias. And
Cognitive
confirmatory
bias.
bias is where it's a non-forensic context. So the
Confirmatory.
police, for example, tap up the social workers or something like that to get them to write a report that confirms
That's right, yeah.
with their assessment of things. And
Yeah.
it's a major problem in Ireland, I think.
I think everywhere.
Yes.
Yep, yep.
So
yeah,
given-
it's across the board.
Given what we know about the way things can go wrong, this is another question. What specific recommendations or what changes would you like to see happen? What do you think would help? I mean, we can't change human nature.
No,
But-
we can't.
No,
But
but we can take it into account.
Mm-hmm.
that's a factor that needs to be taken into account. It's sort of interesting. Like I said before, the checks and balances need to be established. The accountability, transparency and equality needs to be guiding principles in any system of public law.
Yeah.
People should not get promotion simply because they got results. This is a key element here, because and by getting results I mean because they get a conviction. Somehow or other, once a conviction happens, everybody says, "Oh, phew, that's good, that's over with."
Yeah,
It is, but it might be an innocent person that's in prison.
that's right.
And let me tell you, we're talking about death penalty cases and murder cases and everything else, but there are innocent people in prison for very minor offences. I'll give you an example of something. When I was in Portlaoise prison at my time there, a young man came to me, terribly upset. Young kid from 22 years of age from inner city Dublin, and he was upset because he had received 5 years for 203 burglaries. Right? He was upset because the guards had promised him 2 years if he would, as they say, take a bow. Now what had happened was this young man was a drug addict. He was trying to score heroin on the street in Dublin. The guards arrested him and the dealer. He was strung out on drugs. He needed a fix. They took him into Store Street Police Station, and they told him they'd give him methadone if he would sign to 50 burglaries. Yeah, sure, he signed to the 50 burglaries. And then they took him from there to Fitzgibbon Street Police Station, and they got him to sign to another 50 burglaries. But they didn't give him the methadone. And then they took him out to Clontarf, and he signed to another bunch of burglaries until eventually, he had 203 burglaries signed to, confessed to, and they promised him he would only get 2 years, and then eventually they gave him his fix. But when he went to court pleading guilty, the court sentenced him to 5 years. Now the interesting thing to me was that was the only thing that annoyed him, that the guards had lied to him. You know. So he asked me to look at the case, and I said, okay. And I knew this kid had been in and out of jail before. So I said to him, look, go out to the governor and ask him for copies of all your warrants. And don't tell him I sent you. So he went out to the governor and bring me the warrants. So he did that. And when I got the warrants, I discovered that he had actually been in prison while at the times when some of these burglaries had been committed. He couldn't have committed them. And we had the proof. So I wrote him up a case, and I said, get your solicitor and go to appeal on this case. You're going to win. And that's it. So they released him 2 weeks later.
Wow.
so the case wouldn't go to appeal. So nobody would know about it, and the 203 burglaries were wiped off the record book.
Unbelievable.
You said something there that's very interesting, which I think a lot of people who don't have interaction with the police really don't understand, that they do lie all the time.
Well, I don't know whether all the time, but they do lie consistently, all right, yes. But this is not unusual. This is, again, human nature, if you think about it. People will tell, people say there's fibs and there's little lies and big lies and all. People will lie to protect themselves. People will lie to enhance themselves. People will tell fibs to make themselves look better. And police will tell lies if they're going to get the results that their superiors are demanding they should get.
So the answer is focus. Focus. I find myself using this word so often these days. It's the focus. The focus now is on punishment, okay? Fear and punishment.
That's right.
And if the focus were turned to healing society, making things better, then you'd have a whole different system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
It would be about finding the truth, making things better.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they'd have to go to prison, but it wouldn't be as much for punishment as it would be for rehabilitation.
Right.
Maybe this person can be better.
Yeah.
Maybe when they get out in however many years, you'd have a nice neighbor, who'd help the other young kids in the neighborhood not to make the same mistake, rather than a predator of some sort, somebody who's been so messed up. Like, even the guys who are exonerated, they live in poverty. Now, I know you hear about the millions that some people get, but it's a very small percentage that gets them, and you don't hear about the rest. The rest, most of them live in poverty for the rest of their life, which is shortened tremendously by the stress that they've been through, not only by being wrongly imprisoned, but by getting out and having no way to start up their life again, which is partly why we started the work we do, the Sunny Center. But there's no focus on making anything better. And I think that's really the most important thing, is to change the focus from this idea about fear
Crime and
and punishment to healing and making our society better. It's really that simple.
That's so true. In the United States, there's the Corrections Corporation of America is the private company that runs the prisons. And they're complaining that not enough people are being sent to prison and they're losing money. Because
It's
you
a
see,
for-profit company.
They have to
the
pay.
legalization
The state has to
of
pay for the
the
application.
legalization of cannabis, for example, in some of the states in the United States means that less people are going to prison and they're losing money. That's what it's about there. Okay. Now, our prison population is quite high
Going up
too,
in smoke.
and a large percentage of our prison population are in prison because of non-payment of fines. Would you believe that? That's true. Over 50% of the people in prison in Ireland are there because of non-payment of fines. In Holland, they've closed down 1/3 of their prisons because there's the crime has gone less, and there aren't people to put to prison. And they're converting their prisons now into housing units and accommodation for refugees because there's less crime, because they look at it in a different way. And that's true of most of the Scandinavian countries as well, and Denmark as well. When a person is sent to prison in the United States, the key is thrown away and they're there for the rest of their lives if they can't make. When a person is sent to prison here, they do their time and that's it. They get 1/4 remission. When a person is sent to prison in Denmark, the day after they go into the prison, the social welfare officer in the prison hands them a booklet in which is laid out the programs that are available to them while they're in prison. If they choose to work, that means they work 8 hours a day. They get paid the same salary wage they would get if they were on the outside. If they have dependents, that money is deducted so that they can maintain their wife and their family from their wages. So much is deducted for their keep, so much is deducted for savings for when they get out again, and they serve far less time, because the process is not to put people away and lock them up for good, but to put people away and help them to change.
Well, this leads to a nice segue into the next question, which is, what has the process of healing been like for you guys?
Sorry, you said it again?
What has the process for healing been like for you guys?
Individually and together.
Either, however you
Yeah,
want to
well,
answer it.
that's what made it so nice for us, is that when we met, both of us had individually and separately decided that the best thing for us to do would be to focus on healing.
Yeah.
So, and it was really funny, when we met, I didn't know anything about Peter and his situation, and he came to hear me do a talk, and he was devastated by that, and hearing about what had happened to me, because it brought back so many similarities of what happened to him. And then when I finally got to ask, I found out about his backstory, and I said, so how did you get through your ordeal, being sentenced to death and 15 years in prison? He said, oh, I did yoga and meditation. I was like, oh my God, because that's what I did. I did yoga and meditation too. And like, how many guys do you know who say they did yoga and meditation to get through prison? You know, it doesn't happen a lot. So I was like, oh my God, this is amazing. And so that really was the basis of our original bond, not the fact that we'd both been wrongly convicted and sentenced to death and all that. That was kind of very interesting, but it was that bond that we both had decided that healing was more important than being angry or looking for revenge or compensation or any of that. That was it. And then we became part of each other's healing. And that's what's cemented.
And one of the first subjects we discussed with each other was forgiveness.
That's right. It's essential.
Because that was so essential for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
And it's so essential for everybody, actually. To be in the spirit of forgiveness is to cut the tie between oneself and whatever person one thinks has done one harm.
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise, you're still connected.
Yeah.
Mm.
And by cutting that invisible tie that exists, one gets freedom. And forgiveness is not, for me anyway, is not a generous act towards the other person, but rather it's a selfish act for myself, because I know I need to be able to forgive if I'm going to heal.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't carry around resentments, I can't carry around anger. Anger is perfectly normal emotion, everybody experiences it, but to hold on to it is very damaging, and it can kill one. And I know this, and bitterness. The death rate among exonerees in the first couple of months after they're released from prison is 12 times higher than it is in the normal population. Mm-hmm. And that's because they have gone through such stress and strain in the time they spent in prison, which is multiplied when they come out and find themselves an alien in the world outside with no help, no inner help that they need. And that creates its own stress and strain, and that causes heart conditions and all sorts of conditions.
Mm.
And they get ill and they die, because part of that, and the key element of that, is the anger and bitterness they hold over what the system has done to them is not released. And if it's not released, it will kill us.
And there's nothing done to help them to release that. There's no apology. Nobody apologizes to you for taking half your life away.
Right.
And it's such a letdown when you're going to get out. You're like, just let me out of here. That's all I need. Just let me out of here. I'll take care of myself, you know. And then you get out, and it's overwhelming, and you find out that freedom isn't free. Like, you know, if you don't have money, you can't even eat.
Right.
So, and you come out with no money, nothing. So, and many of the guys are in so long that they don't have any family left anymore.
Right.
So there's nowhere to go. There's no one to help you, and you end up struggling for your basic needs, and it's so stressful and overwhelming that people they die, and it's terrible. And there are now starting to be organizations that try to help a person get a place to live and maybe a car, and of course you're basically unemployable because, like, you don't learn any skills in there that are marketable.
Right.
So you're living on this very basic income, and in the States, what you get is far less than what you get here.
Yeah.
You really cannot live on it. So again, it brings us back to the focus and the fact that you always have a choice.
Well, I've heard you speak before, and you talked about while you were in, some of the healing had already started by doing yoga and that sort of thing. But the other thing that I've heard you speak about, and maybe you could speak to this, is how you sort of changed your mindset. And can you talk about that?
Yeah, that's the choice. First of all, you have to realize that you have a choice. Okay, I was sentenced to death. I was put into this small cell, 6 steps from the solid metal door to the toilet, and I could reach out my arms and touch both walls. There was nothing in it but a metal shelf with a thin mattress, a little pillow. That's all. That's all that was there. I was allowed 2 books, a Bible and a law book. I didn't get phone calls. I didn't get, in the beginning, visits. I only got out of my cell 2 times a week for a brief shower and about 15 minutes outside in a courtyard with a guard who wouldn't speak to me, taken back in, and then it'd be another 3 or 4 days till I got out again. They would bring my food and slip it through a slot in the door without any communication with me whatsoever. And that was it. And I was supposed to just wait for them to decide when to take my life. That was it. Until one day, to make this story very brief, one day something I read in the Bible told me that they don't say when I die. It's not up to them. I wish I knew exactly what that was, what I read. But I realized all of a sudden, wait a minute, okay, I can't leave the cell. They can keep me here. They can imprison my little body. But they cannot imprison my mind. They cannot imprison my spirit. The rest of me is still free. And I have a choice. And the time that's left to me, be it long or be it short, I can choose how I spend that time. I do not have to spend what might be the rest of my life in fear and misery and anger and confusion. That's their story. My story is that until they just realize that they made a mistake and send me home, or for some reason of karma that I don't understand yet, they do take my life, until that point, my life still belongs to me, and I don't have to live it that way. And in fact, I realized that for the first time in my life, I had servants. Didn't I? Didn't they cook for me? Bring me my food, do my dishes, do my laundry. I had no bills to pay for electricity. It was a perfect opportunity for me to do my spiritual work. So that's what I decided. And then they became my servants. And instead of seeing them as the enemy that was keeping me there, everything changed. It was my perspective that changed. That's all that changed. But it changed the world. Mm-hmm. So when they brought me my food, I could say thank you very much. Because they were helping me. And I would get my food, and I would think of all the beautiful things that I would serve my children when I got home and eat whatever it was. And I would get up in the morning and do my yoga and my meditation and prayer, because at that point in time I wasn't really sure there was God anymore, because how could God let this happen to me and my whole family? I had 2 small children when I was convicted. I had a 9-year-old son and a 10-month-old daughter. And my parents were devastated by what happened. So I would do my yoga, meditation, and prayer, because I also could choose whether or not there was God. If there was no God, my situation was just totally hopeless. So I chose to believe in hope, which meant God and I had a serious discussion, and then I would do my prayers. And it changed everything. Right. Everything was changed. I no longer was angry. I could see them as spirits here on their journey as well. And I actually developed compassion for them, because I wouldn't want to spend every day keeping people locked up. That would be a sad thing. So it became totally different. And I thought I had mastered forgiveness too, but when I got out, I realized I had a little more to go. But
we all do.
Yeah.
Tell me what your vision was and is for the Sunny Center.
Oh,
And maybe
thank
you can
for
explain
asking.
to the audience what that is.
Okay. Before we met, we each realized that something needed to be done to help people who come out of prison wrongly convicted, because this had happened to both of us. And then when we met and discussed it, we decided we would host people. And we were living in a little 2-bedroom cottage in Connemara at the time, and so we offered we had exonerees came to us one at a time and stayed with us, and that was it. And then we were in New York, and we met some people in New York, some good people there, and over lunch one day, the host said to us, tell these people what you do. So we were telling them about this, and someone said to us, do you have a foundation? No, I didn't know what a foundation was, because that's not a term you use in Ireland. In Ireland, you'd say a charity. And I said, what's a foundation? And they told me. I said, no, we don't. Oh, you should have a foundation. So they set it in motion. And now we have a foundation which is registered in New York, a 501c3, which is what they call it, foundation, which means that any donations made to it can be tax deductible. And so, and we have a board of directors. And now we have a bigger house. Now we have a 3-bedroom house all en suite, and we can host 2 exonerees at a time. And that's what we do, 1 or 2 as they come. And Sonny has a brilliant idea of establishing an air miles bank, so what we do there is, business people and lawyers and do a lot of travelling in their time. They don't worry about air miles. They gather air miles all the time. So we ask people to pledge their air miles to the Sunny Centre. And they do. And so when we need to bring an exoneree, for example, from the United States, we contact one of these people. We give them the details of the person and the flights we want and say, will you book these flights for us, please, on your air miles? And they do. And that's how we bring them over. It's free. And I meet them at the airport, I bring them home, and they stay with us. And in the time they're with us, they're able to share their inner problems, because they know we know where they're coming from. They know we understand them because we've been there. And they see us living in a very quiet, loving, caring environment where we have cats and dogs and hens and goats. And inevitably what happens is one of them will find themselves attached to one of the animals, and that's like their healing attachment. And in time that they're with us, they're able to dig into them, reach into themselves, and bring healing to themselves. We don't heal them; they heal themselves. And so when they go back to America, they can go back not as an exoneree or as an ex-prisoner, but as somebody who's been on holidays in Ireland. And
That's nice.
and they can face their life in a new way, because you see, they only see themselves when they come as being an ex-prisoner, as an exoneree, and they've no money. It's difficult to understand the poverty that we've met. I'll give you an example of 2 quick examples, if I may. One man that was with us, we had to go to a wake, and we said, listen, we have to go to a wake. And he says, what's a wake? And I explained it to him. I said, do you not have, no, but this, he was from the inner city of Detroit. I said, do you not know, well, funerals there? He said, we don't have funerals. I said, what do you mean you don't have funerals? What happens if one of your family dies? Oh, we don't have money to bury people, so we phone the police. We tell them somebody's died. The police come and they take away the body and they examine it, and if it's a natural death, after about 3 weeks they write to the family and say the remains of so-and-so is now ready for burial. But they can't afford to bury it, so then the state cremates the remains, and that's it. That's poverty. Even here in the time of the famine, people were able to bury their dead. But over there, that's the way it is. We have a man came only last year to us, a lovely man, 6'4", big, tall, black American man, and he said to us, we ask everybody, like, is there any food you don't like to eat? He said, oh, I'll eat anything. He says, I love vegetables. I love my green vegetables. So Sonny cooked a lovely meal and put it for him, and he sat at the table and he picked at it, and we said, what's wrong? He's not eating it. He says, this is not the way I eat, he said. It transpired that he's on subsistence in America. He gets food stamps. So he goes to the cheapest store like Walmart and he buys the cheapest tins of food he can get. And he lives out of tinned food. And so if he sees tinned cabbage and it says contains vitamin B2 or something like that, he thinks that's healthy food. And that's what he was living on.
And here I was giving him stuff from the
And
garden,
we were giving him
fresh.
organic, fresh, living vegetables, but he couldn't eat it. Because what he was used to was that poverty trap that he was stuck in. He went away asking Sonny to give him her recipes, and he was eating the best of food. And also we discovered then he'd no top teeth, because he'd fallen off his bicycle and hit his head off the curb and burst all his teeth. So we got him to a dentist.
It had been a year.
And that was a year previously. He couldn't chew. So we got him to the dentist. We brought him in at 11:30 in the morning, and the dentist, he walked out with a top denture at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And the beautiful thing about that is when I went to pay, the dentist said to me, "No, Peter, that's on me." He says, "I'd like that to be my contribution to the work you're doing."
That's really
So
nice.
the
was beautiful.
vision that we have for the center would really be that we would be able to expand. Hopefully the fundraising would do a little better. You know, there are a number of people that we met through the play The Exonerated, which is another whole story, but that have become friends of the center. We're always looking for people to become friends of the center as volunteers or as donating air miles or as donors, and that we might be able to expand so that we could have Sunny centers all over the world.
Yeah.
You
Oh,
know,
that'd be
like
great.
another one in America. We have the one here. We've had inquiries from India, South Africa, Italy, and
Bhutan.
so that the exonerees that come to us might learn how to do what we do, and then take the
Stop
work
their own.
further, because we're sort of in the position of being mentors now. We're older, and we know that there's only a limited time we can continue this work, so we need other people to learn what we do and to be able to continue the work. So
That's great.
we would hope that that's what would happen.
We're also trying to set up, like in America, there are clusters of exonerees, if I may use that term. For example, in different cities, like in Dallas, in Texas, there are 35 exonerees in Dallas, in Texas. They've all organized themselves together. But you can have a group of exonerees in Chicago and Boston and different places. So we're trying to organize it so that we would arrange to have, say, weekend healing sessions, that the exonerees would all come together with us and we would just work together, that we can reach more people. And in order to do that, we're setting it up so that we get speaking engagements in universities in those particular cities, so that we get paid for do that, and that would pay the expense of flying over to America and setting up this and doing this.
Yeah, isolation is a big problem.
Huge
for
problem, yeah.
exonerees. A really bad problem. Poverty is another, and in many cases they're not able to get passports because either the process is overwhelming, having to deal with the authorities, or there's something about their case that's not totally resolved and they're not able to get a passport yet. Especially, I think, with the women, isolation is a big problem. When we were at the Innocence Project conference each year, I've noticed that the women have even more particular difficulties than
Yeah.
the men.
Yeah.
Yeah, because often the case involves the killing of a child,
Yeah.
and that stigma never goes away.
Yeah.
And that's another problem that all exonerees have to face, is that at any time, someone can always come up and say, "I don't believe you were really innocent."
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's just something you have to deal with.
I mean, imagine the situation of a young man, 16, 17, 18 years of age, who's wrongly accused of a rape and murder and locked up for maybe 20 to 25, 30 years, and then he's exonerated and he comes out with no help whatsoever from the authorities, no compensation, pure poverty. And we discovered this when he came to, we've had this coming to us. he's never had a relationship in his life. He's now in his 50s. We had one man who came and he had one relationship, 54 years of age, he had one relationship after he came out of prison. He's scared, he's terrified of trying to speak to a woman.
Because what if he's accused again?
Because what if he's wrongfully accused again? It's already happened to him once, to somebody that he didn't speak to, I didn't even know. So how do you talk with people? How do you talk with a woman? He doesn't know. He's absolutely terrified. So in that particular instance, as it happened, we take him with us, we socialise, we bring him socialising, and he mixes. We don't say, this is so-and-so, he's an exoneree. We don't say, this is so-and-so, he spent 30 years in prison. We say, this is our friend so-and-so who's visiting from America. And he's accepted as that. And then he begins to find himself having normal conversations with females. And you see the way his face changes, and you see the way his whole demeanour changes. And he comes away like walking on air.
With hope. That's what we do mostly,
That's
is
the
we
key.
give hope.
He gets hope.
I'd say
For a
that's
future.
what we do.
Yeah.
Yeah, that it's possible.
And
Well-
you see, the thing is, with the best will in the world, their lawyers don't understand this. Their lawyers don't make any provision for this. And they're left alone.
Well, the
And to our
lawyers and the social
amazement, we
workers.
couldn't believe this until we were actually told this. We're the only centre of its kind in the whole wide world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there you go.
Any questions?
More just an admiration for the way you're able to forgive and the importance of that to be able to move on.
Thank you. Yeah, it's essential.
It's a good quality.
And it was also the legacy I wanted to leave to my children, who grew up without me, is that because they had issues as well, and forgiveness was essential for their healing too.
And I think that you haven't said this specifically, but one of the things that I think is also remarkable about your vision for the Sunny Center is that it's not just for exonerees, that you welcome people's families as well.
Oh,
because
yes, absolutely.
this isn't an issue that just impacts the person who's wrongfully convicted. It impacts,
Their whole
the
family.
children, the siblings, the friends. I mean, it impacts, the damage is enormous.
Yes.
We've actually, on separate occasions, we've hosted two lawyers, two human rights lawyers who were, each individually were facing burnout.
From working with these cases.
From the working with the cases, they were, and they were so emotionally disturbed. And they said, can we come? We said, yeah, sure.
Yeah,
And
they
did.
need a little boost of hope too. Yeah.
You see, people sometimes say to us, I don't know how you got through that. I'd never be able to get through that, which we know is not so. And the whole point here is that every one of you here, at some times in your life already, has faced some desperate situation which you didn't think at the time you could manage. Or if you haven't, you will do. Be sure of that before you pass away. There will come a time in your life that you'll have to face something which at the time you'll think is not possible for you to deal with. But if you can only realize that within yourself, in here, each individual has the capacity to deal with whatever is put in front of them. And if you can reach into that depth within yourself, you can deal with whatever it is you're faced with.
That's great.
And come out the better for it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? There's a question.
If you were to meet somebody just as they were being sentenced and you knew they were innocent, what's the one thing you'd say to them? Because I know both of you would have been in that position. What would be the one thing you would like to somebody to say to you that you'd like to pass on to
Well,
somebody?
that's a good question.
What was the question?
If you met someone who's just being sentenced and you knew that they were being wrongfully convicted, what advice would you have for them? What would you tell them to help them?
That's a tough one. You
I
know-
would say, don't give up.
No, that's
Never give up.
that's a must. You don't give
And-
up. You have to
but
be
to-
stubborn.
But to make sure that you nurture yourself. Don't let them destroy you.
Mm.
You know.
And don't expect an instant response.
Yeah, and
an
get
instant
comfortable,
solution.
because
Yeah.
Because it's a long
it's
haul.
going to take a long time.
You might need some patience.
And as Sonny says, if you're going to get a lawyer, get a young lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah, because it could take so long, your lawyer will pass away. Old age. It happened to me
It
too.
happened to Sonny.
It did.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
Does somebody else have a question over there? Yeah.
If I may ask, I think it would have crossed your mind. Did you ever have to think about what exactly did I do? And when your mind goes back, do you get to think of, is it the way I talked? That's thinking of the day before
The-
you were arrested.
Like, why me kind of thing?
What did I do the day before? Who did I speak to? What made them to decide that I'll be the person there? What did I do wrong? How did you handle that?
Yeah, the question is, like, would you question yourself and say, what did I do for them to focus on me, or for this to happen to me? I think everybody does that. You're right. Everybody thinks, well, why did this happen to me? You know, and
Would you say there's something particularly you did that made them to? I'm just trying to think. Was there something you could actually point a finger to say, maybe it's because I did it as I was a kid?
well, in the process of forgiveness, the most difficult one to forgive was myself, because I felt that I made some very stupid, foolish decisions, you know, that maybe put me in a position for this to occur, and you blame yourself. Nothing that I did made this happen, but you say, well, if I only had been smarter, if I had only, you know, said this or done that, or gone somewhere else, or gone back to school or whatever, you do tend to blame yourself, but that's kind of a trap, because in all of these cases that I know of, the person really, it could have been anyone, you know?
Right.
So you do tend to fault yourself. Like the man who Peter was talking about was wrongly convicted of the rape and murder. He thinks that if only maybe he had been more aware of what was going on around him, maybe he could have prevented the woman from being killed. He hardly knew her. She was just an acquaintance. But he feels, oh, maybe if I had been more alert and more had together in my life, maybe I would have been able to help this woman, and she wouldn't have been in that position. So now he tries to help every woman that is having difficulty, you know, because it's his mission in life now. But it's not his fault at all. He did nothing. He did nothing wrong. But it stays with you. Maybe if I had done something different, but the fact is that it didn't depend on anything that we did. It was all just a matter of circumstances that you were easy.
My situation was different. They picked on me because I had a political background, because I'd been a political activist from the time I was a teenager. I had been interned in the Curragh from 1957 to 59 without charge or trial, so they considered me a subversive. The guy they were chasing got away from them, and they needed closure. So they picked me up and framed me. That brought closure, so the media couldn't. There was an investigative journalist was beginning to uncover the fact that there was a cover-up over what actually happened at the scene of the crimes. And they had to get closure to stop him, and so they picked me up. And he actually sent word to me in the prison about this before my trial. And then recently, this is very interesting too, because like in the case of Harry Gleeson that you know of in Tipperary way back 72, whatever it was, years ago.
It was exactly 75 years ago today that Harry Gleeson was hanged.
That's
so it's
right.
very
Wow.
appropriate that we have this.
And today is
event
also
today.
the anniversary of the last hanging in Ireland.
Yeah.
What was that, 42 years ago? Yeah.
60.
But anyway, to come back to this, and so recently I met somebody from the district where the collision happened and the shooting happened and everything else. And they told me that everybody in the area knew there was a cover-up.
Oh,
Everybody locally knew there was a cover-up. And everybody locally knew that I wasn't one of them. But you see, ordinary people on the street, so to speak, are not listened to. And they don't have the power unless they speak out. And they were afraid to speak out because if they speak out, maybe they pick on them.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the way it works with police power.
But you do wonder, why me, you know, why, if there's something I could have done differently, that maybe it wouldn't have been me. No one
When I
can
was-
answer that question.
When I was taking my case on my own behalf, because I had to prepare my own case from the prison because I had no lawyers, no money. And I was up in the High Court and I was being brought up to the cell, and there was the police officer, the Garda inspector, who was in charge of security. He was walking along beside me and he says to me, "What are you looking for here? What's going on here?" I said, "I'm looking to have my conviction quashed." He says, "Are you saying you're innocent?" I said, "Yeah." So we're walking along and he said, "Well, why would they pick on you?" I said, "The only reason I know is that because I have a Republican background. I was interned in the 50s. "Oh yeah, that's good enough reason," he said. He's an inspector in the police.
Well, like, let's say a lot of the people who become victims of this wrongful conviction thing were on drugs. Okay? So you could say they could fault themselves and say, if I wasn't on drugs, maybe this wouldn't have happened to me. And that might be true. But that doesn't excuse what happened.
No.
You know, you somehow become a victim, you know, but it's so easy. It's so easy. You know, a mental illness can make you a victim, drug addiction can make you a victim, poverty can make you a victim.
And often it's just being marginalized in some way, you know.
Marginalization
Yeah.
in some way.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Also, and things have slightly improved, especially
There's
with the
another
social media.
question.
People are becoming more conscious, because I was reading about Michael Mannion, the last man that was executed in Ireland, only reading about him today. And there was a history of mental illness in his family. But the judge wouldn't allow this to be brought out in the court.
Yeah.
And he was executed.
Mhm.
That lady
Where
there.
was
A
the
question over there?
Just seeing that we're kind of like, how do we move forward, or with your first-hand experience, what would you, for reform of the systems? It seems like there's cracks in the systems with the prosecutorial misconduct, with lawyers, with maybe investigative journalists.
To move forward in the system and fix things?
Improve
Well,
it.
I would say, first of all, accountability is really important. I would say second of all is the public. The public needs to let it be known what they want. We want a justice system that's just.
Not
Just
just
us.
results. Yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
just us. You want justice? It's us. So we have to make it known that we don't just want results. We want our society to be better. We don't just want punishment. We want a focus more on rehabilitation, so that we can find the person, and also prevention. I think there's not enough focus and money going into prevention. In the elementary level of school, everybody knows the kids that are going to get in trouble. Everybody knows the kids that are having a terrible home life, or that are on drugs, or that are having mental problems. Everybody knows. And it's up to us to deal with that, to put more effort into preventing these things from happening, rather than using fear and punishment and making us think that that's going to make things better, because it obviously hasn't.
Right.
So
We have a
that's
question
what
there.
I think.
Because you both spent such a huge amount of time in prison, was there ever, like, almost a breaking point? You obviously both knew you were innocent, but was there ever a breaking point where you just had to sit down and say to yourself, no one's ever going to find out that I didn't do this? And if there was that type of breaking point, how do you recover from that, especially while you're still trapped inside prison?
No.
Well, at the very beginning, Peter, when they said your sentence,
At first,
that was, I think, one of those
at first,
points.
after my sentence was commuted to 40 years, I was without any possibility of remission or parole. And I was put back into the general prison population. After a couple of days, when that novelty wore off, I kind of got into a bit of despair, and I said to myself, "Oh, sod this, you know." So I just didn't get out of bed. And I stayed in my bed in the cell, and I stayed in my bed in the cell for 5 days. And nothing happened. And then I realised that they'd just leave me there in the bed for 5 days. Nobody's going to do anything, and if I was going to do anything, I had to do it myself. So I got up out of bed and I cleaned my cell and I went to the laundry and washed all my clothes and decided I was going to prove my innocence, and that was it, you know.
Mm.
But there were times I wasn't sure I was going to win, but I was going to try. Because there's one thing about it, like it's like Sonny says about the death penalty. We may not succeed in abolishing the death penalty globally in our lifetime, but it won't be for the want of trying.
That's right. I had a time like that because after my sentence, after the first 5 years when I was sentenced to death, my sentence was changed from death to life. And it was such a relief. You can imagine, not for me, but my parents, you know. And so they decided they could finally feel comfortable to take a vacation that didn't include bringing the children to prison. And they went on vacation, but the plane crashed and they were killed. And that definitely was the worst day of my life. But it meant that there was no one outside anymore to help me, to make sure that I had a lawyer or anything. And that, at that point, I didn't know what would happen to me. It was starting to look bad. But there was a lawyer that lived in their town that helped me with their burial and with my children, and you know, because they had to be put into foster care, and he became a friend, and he found me an appeals lawyer that would work for free. And that's the one I was talking about, where get a young lawyer. This guy wasn't that old, he was in his mid-40s, but he ended up dying of a heart attack before my appeal was through. And he had 2 young apprentice lawyers working under him, and they took up my case. And that's the only reason that I'm free. Is that and dear friends who wouldn't let go of me. So at that point, I really wasn't sure if it would ever be resolved, because there was no one to help me anymore. But again, I realized that no matter where I am, I have a choice. And I decided I would make the best possible life that I could within the prison. I taught reading to people who were, it's a special kind of illiteracy, like...
Dyslexia?
No, it's like you can read like stop signs and stuff, but you know, they can't really read. So I taught reading, I taught mathematics, I taught yoga to people to help them with their stress. We lifers started a little group, like a chamber of commerce, you know, so we could try to improve conditions. And we did what we could. We made little family units. I kind of adopted some of the very young, they were sentencing 14-year-old children to life in prison in Florida at the time. So a couple of them became like my kids, an older lady became like my mom, you know, and you make a life. So I decided that whether I got out or I never got out, I would be okay with myself. And I would make the best life I could. And so that's what I decided to do. So it would have been okay for me either way. Of course, I really hoped it would be this way. but if it wasn't, then it would be okay. And so that's how I managed it. But that was my moment, you know, then.
Well,
May I just say something about the question that lady was asking there earlier? I wanted to come into it. The thing to remember about the justice system and the injustices within it is that it's all operated in your name. They do it in our names. And if the public are prepared to allow them to do it the wrong way, then so be it, that's the way it is. But if the public are prepared to speak up for justice, to be heard for justice, it can change and it will change.
Well, I think that's a great note to end this evening, and I want to thank you guys. It's been truly inspirational and insightful, and thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Anne, for having
Thank
us.
you. Nancy. It was a pleasure.
And for the comfortable chairs.
Yeah, they're lovely.